Today will be a bit of a whirlwind tour through everything related crypto. Not the money kind of crypto, but the basic crypto, like what used to be crypto in the past, or what used to be called crypto in the past. Also stands for cryptography. And we'll cover all the basics and like the foundations of cryptography that every computer scientist should know. This will be a bit of a whirlwind tour, so we're not going to go super deep. We're not going to prove any kind of algorithms. But the goal of this class is to give you a bit of an overview of different kind of like what cryptography is about, what the key goals are, how the different bits and pieces fit together, and also for you to spot some of the weaknesses and limitations these systems may have. As always, if there are any kind of questions during the class, please feel to reach out, ask questions. The more interactive this is, the more interesting this is also going to be for you, the better learning experience you're going to have. And keep using the discussion forum if there's questions and whatnot. So we're trying to be as responsive as possible. There's many of you, so especially if there's questions, we may not get to answer it in minutes, but we're trying to be as responsive as possible with the resources that we have. Cool. Quick poll. Who had a crypto class in before? Has already taken a crypto class? Okay, a good half. Here at EPFL. One of Serge's classes. Okay, so it's a bunch. Those that were not taking Serge's class, which one did you take? A class on crypto. Okay, cool. So this is not going to go deep. What others cover in a semester, we're going to cover in 3 hours. And 3 hours from 4 to 7 p.m. So we're trying to keep this a bit light and a bit educative so that you can get the basics. If you want to go deeper than what we present here, go take one of the actual crypto classes. So we're not going to cover any details. You're not going to become crypto experts, but I want you to get familiar with like a sniff test. Does it smell reasonable or not, or is it rotten? Right? So that you get a little bit of an intuition of how the different crypto protocols work, so that you can look at it from a security perspective and kind of assess basics and also understand like the basics and safe defaults for cryptography when you're implementing any kind of cryptographic protocol that you will see through your professional careers. So what are the learning goals for today? Basics of symmetric crypto, what are stream ciphers, block ciphers, different kind of operation modes, how everything fits together, basics of cryptography, past of cryptography and whatnot. Also data integrity, like how can you ensure integrity of data, how can you check for integrity, what are hash functions, message authentication codes and whatnot, how they fit together. Authenticated encryption, as in combining encryption and integrity, confidentiality and integrity. Also then looking at public key crypto, digital signatures, Diffie-Hellman key exchanges and whatnot, followed by a short discussion of a couple of case studies on public key infrastructures and TLS, transport layer security. Right, so there's a long list of topics that we're going to go through. We're trying, as I said, to keep it light so that you can keep focusing on some high-level goals and just develop an understanding and the smell test, as I mentioned, is this a reasonable approach towards crypto? Should we use this algorithm or should we use that other algorithm? Where does cryptography come from? Its etymology comes from secret writing and enciphering and deciphering of messages in secret code or cipher, like computerized encoding and decoding of information, right? So that's an old ancient art of hiding your messages from an adversary so that they cannot read the details. What are the high-level goals of cryptography that we are looking at. First of which is confidentiality, as in the data in the message should only be accessible with the correct key, which means we want to hide access to the data from third parties that are not authenticated or not authorized to actually read the underlying message. So confidentiality is one of the key goals. Data can only be accessed if you have the right key, the correct key. Also, integrity. We want to make sure that the message cannot be tampered with. Imagine you're sending a message from your end to the other end of the battlefield with a messenger. You want to ensure that the message cannot be tampered with during transit, but also cannot be read by an adversary who may be able to get hold of the message. Authentication, we also want to ensure that we can identify the author of the message. So if we are receiving a message, I want to make sure that the message is coming from my general on the other side of the field, but not from the adversary who's sending fake messages along the way. Non-repudiation. Also, the author of the message cannot deny being the author. So I want to have a proof that says, hey, this general told me that I need to attack at dawn, whereas, so that I can blame the other general if things go wrong. Now, what kind of cryptographic schemes do you folks know? What have you seen in the past? Just speak up. What's the most basic one? Caesar. Yes, Caesar has been used -50 before Christ. So it's been around for a while. What else? Say again? Elliptical crypto. Yes, that's more recent. Cool. Other schemes? Visionaire. Something intermediate, like between Caesar and ECC. Yeah, it has been used in the past as well as a Pauli substitution cipher. What else?
Enigma.
Enigma. Very nice. Yes. Used during the Second World War when cryptography actually became a very important tool, and especially breaking cryptography. Creating ciphers and breaking ciphers. And Enigma is one of the prime examples that was thought to be secure. It was like a rotation, like a multidimensional rotation system that scrambled the different letters used by the Germans and the Axis during the Second World War, but broken by the British and the Americans, and then used to intercept and decipher the messages. What was the weakness of Enigma? The two main weaknesses.
It was like 51 bits.
Huh?
To be broken by a Turing complete. The solution was Turing complete.
Well, Turing broke it, so that's true, but the Turing completeness has nothing to do with it. What were the, like if you're looking at it, what were the weaknesses of the Enigma encryption? Yeah.
They were always starting with the weather broadcasts.
Yeah.
And using also
Yeah, so that's one of the weaknesses.
so there was like some information they could always test
Uh-huh.
if it was very quickly.
So the beginning of the message was either the weather or Heil Hitler, right? So which made this a known susceptible to known plaintext attacks. That was one, like which allowed the team to test if they correctly decoded a message. So it was a very quick sanitization, like a very quick oracle. What was the second? So this was a mechanical cipher that rotated. Yeah?
No letter would ever be encrypted for itself.
Yeah, true. So if you were encoding an A, it would be encrypted as one of the other 25 letters. So an A would never be encrypted as another A. due to a mechanical weakness or like a mechanical limitation of the design, right? What was the result of this this design limitation? Do you know? Like, why did this make this easier to crack?
Well, it reduced the number for the crack, basically.
Yeah, so it reduces the feature space, right? It reduces the complexity of the calculation, which kind of enabled brute force. And together with the known plain text, this enabled brute forcing the messages, right? Before people figured out these two weaknesses due to crypto analysis, the assumption was, hey, this is rather secure. We need to steal code books, right? Because the keys for each day were shipped to the different parties. So there was a pre-shared key, and if you can get hold of a code book, you can also decode. Usually during the Second World War in these systems, destroying the code book was one of the things, the secrecy things that people did before they surrendered or abandoned ship or whatnot. Very cool. So I don't have slides on that, but I felt this is a very cool discussion. Anything else that comes to mind? So we've got Caesar, Vignier being like simple substitution ciphers, then Enigma, and last but not least, elliptic curve crypto. Anything else that comes to mind?
Modern like RSA or PGP.
Yeah, RSA. Cool. Based on primes, what else? Yeah. Cool. So let's go look at through some of them. Brief look at the past. 50 before Christ, we had Caesar's cipher, which was a simple substitution cipher, and kind of is usually cited as one of the earliest uses. Similar ciphers have been used before, but it's nicely documented that Caesar used it. 1883, an important observation happened, Kirchhoff's principle, that we'll cover afterwards. And in the 70s, we had DES, which was mentioned as well, Diffie-Hellman public key, which was a nice different change, RSA, then ECC, different kind of hash algorithms, and so on. Now, an interesting question that we have here is, like, how do you deploy new algorithms? Like, how do you make sure that new algorithms are actually being used?
When you start finding some NP hard problem and use it.
This is finding some NP hard problem and use it was the suggestion. This is how you discover a new algorithm, which is great, right? Just go to one of the crypto conferences. There's going to be hundreds of schemes that are being proposed. How do you make sure that people use it? How do you deploy new algorithms? Because in the end, all the parties need to agree to deploy. If we stick to the example of Enigma, thank you for bringing this up. Who suggested Enigma? Quick reminder, you were the Enigma guy. Yeah, so if you think about Enigma, they changed the design a couple of times during the war, right? What they had to do to deploy the new versions, they had to ship the freaking machines to every single submarine and ship and station, right? So this was a very costly endeavor. It required quite a bit of effort. Now, software is a bit easier, but we need to get this implemented in a bunch of different systems and targets, right? So there's implementation effort and distribution effort. So this still remains quite hard. Today, we have standardization committees, NIST, where there's usually calls for new and open ciphers. Then they are being discussed in rounds, and the best cryptographers try to break them and rip them apart. And they usually have an incentive because they likely submitted one of the ciphers of their own and want to break everybody else's cipher, right? So there's a very nice game on how to make sure that we can actually get new ciphers out there. And then the last one standing usually wins and becomes the new standard. And for cryptographers, it's like if you have the last surviving cipher, you get a lot of fame and recognition. So there's an incentive there to have your ciphers being deployed. Very cool. So we now know how we can deploy new algorithms. How do you sunset old algorithms? And when do you sunset them? Do we need to sunset algorithms? What do you think? Yes, why?
Because there is usually a weakness discovered that enables someone to break it much, much faster than brute forcing, like in DES.
Okay, very cool. So the comment was there's usually a weakness, or there's often a weakness discovered that allows attackers to break it much faster than originally intended. You're already hinting at something with cryptography where you're saying that like we're expecting it to be hard up to n, like brute force resistance up to a certain amount of hardness, right? And then if people find an attack, they can potentially reduce this brute force hardness from, I don't know, 70 bits to 50 bits or 40 bits or whatnot, and then it becomes much easier computationally to attack. Yeah, so that's one option. What's the other avenue, or what's the other? Yeah.
The brute force power can increase.
Yes, the brute force power can increase, right? A system like a computer that was the fastest cluster in the 90s likely runs on your watches now, right? So the computational power has increased by several orders of magnitude, which means that what used to be considered hard in the past is now considered easy to compute. So we have to we have to change the algorithms to make sure that they remain hard. Now, why did we not use the algorithm that we are using today in the 90s?
Two reasons. We didn't need them, and it was too hard to use them. So even we didn't have enough power to use enough computation.
Yep. I think I count mainly the second reason. You gave two answers. First, we didn't need them. Second, we didn't have the computational power. The not needing is it's a thin line, right? We want the algorithms to be computable on a regular laptop or desktop without having too much performance impact, but they need to be very hard to circumvent, even very hard to break, even by an attacker that has massive amount of computational powers. Right? So you need to be in the sweet spot that it's easy to encrypt or decrypt, but very hard to brute force. Now, if these algorithms would have been easy to run on these old hardware, that would have still been okay. But the hardware is just not there yet. So for old 90s hardware, very likely it doesn't make sense, or we couldn't even run these current crypto protocols. Yes, please. You had a follow-up?
Yeah. So almost. So my point was that, for example, if you have DES, which is safe enough, we don't need to create AES. So if it works and it's safe enough, and at that time it was safe enough, so there was no need to create new algorithm.
Yep. Modulo the exponentially increasing compute power through Moore's law, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your argument is that we could have stuck with the DES, assuming that the computational power no longer increases.
Not stuck, but so at that time, so even now, for example, AES is not a state-of-art algorithm, and some people want to change it already. For example, for Chacha 20 or something like that, just because we cannot, so we have to change algorithm every time, just because we cannot use old one. But the reason why AES wasn't invented in 70s, so was that there were already developed and distributed algorithm, not distributed, so algorithm which was on a lot of machines. So, and just there was no need to spend money to implement new one, to deploy it on several machines and so on.
Right, so your assumption is that, yeah, we're going with the time, and with new times and faster and better machines, we need better algorithms. I partially buy this. Modulo some backdooring that happened in the 90s by different secret agencies, but that's another story we're not really covering. And export controls. So you may likely not remember, but in the 90s, most cryptographic schemes were artificially limited to be crackable by state actors, like backdoor to be crackable by state actors. When like U.S. state, the U.S. government assumed that like only they have the right to strong crypto and nobody else. So that was the first crypto wars, if you want to look it up. So there's an interesting like giving and taking. Essentially, like in a theoretical word, you want the strongest possible algorithm to have the longest possible protection. Also, if I record your communication from the 90s, I may be able to decode it now. Right? So that's another question that needs to be answered. We'll cover a bit of that in the course. So let's continue a bit. Good follow-up so far. Very nice. Thank you. Brief look at the present and future. I think this was already brought up. No, this actually not. So one of the issues we're looking at for current research is that if quantum computers ever come to exist, they will break many of the crypto algorithms, because you can essentially compute an exponential number of tries in one go, and therefore we're moving towards post-quantum cryptography that tries to ensure even with a quantum computer you cannot break the underlying cryptographic primitives. Now, will we ever have a quantum computer? That's another question to be answered. Let's do a poll. Who thinks we'll have a quantum computer in 10 years from now?
Which kind of? Because we do have it now.
Who thinks we have a quantum computer now? A useful quantum computer?
I didn't say useful.
That's why I added to my question. Right. Will we have a useful quantum computer in 10 years that breaks crypto? Who thinks yes? About 5%. Who thinks no? About 50%. The other 40% are in a quantum entangled state that don't know yet. I like the idea of quantum computer. Like this is my personal opinion. Don't hang me for it. I like the idea of quantum computers because they're extremely powerful. Now, an interesting question from a research perspective is if this will ever materialize. Will we have strong enough quantum computers to do actually useful things? As you mentioned, we already have quantum computers that have a couple of qubits, right? But they are extremely expensive and extremely limited. Now, do we see a path where we can extend the number of qubits towards where we can do some actual useful computation, such as breaking cryptography, or is this forever going to be limited? Now, my personal opinion is that, again, personal opinion, that quantum computer is like cold fusion. For the last 40 years, we were told 10 years from now we have cold fusion. But it's always been 10 years from now. Right? So it's, I'm a bit skeptic if this will ever happen, if this will ever be useful. I would like to see this because it's very, very interesting, but I'm a bit skeptic. Right? So we'll see. But that's certainly an interesting playground for cryptographers to figure out new algorithms that are safe, considering potential attack vectors in the future. Because if it materializes, it can happen very quickly that all our cryptographic primitives become useless. Now, today on the internet, most of the traffic is being end-to-end encrypted. Right? So if this is suddenly becoming useless, this is an interesting attack vector, especially as we now rely massively on cryptography for all of our communication. So yeah, interesting topic. Let's go through the different approaches and introduce the basic primitives. We've already had the Caesar scheme being mentioned. Here the idea is that two parties agree on a simple algorithm, for example, rotate by 13 and keep it secret. So the scheme would be rotation. We shift the letters by a certain number, and we just shift it by 13, for example. So 13 would be our key, the number of 13. Caesar cipher was a simple shift of letters, right? 13 letters to the left or right. Now, if you know that it's a shift, if you know that Caesar was using a shift cipher, or a simple rotation cipher, it only takes 26 tries to break it. This is extremely simple. Even with pen and paper, you can break this algorithm, right? So brute force is trivial. Now, in 1883, Kirchhoff formulated his principle that says a crypto system should be secure even if everything about the system except the key is public knowledge. Now, for the Caesar cipher and a lot of these simple rotation ciphers or replacement ciphers, this is not true because you can brute force the key fairly easily, right? Under certain caveats. Here, with a simple rotational cipher, it's really trivial to look at the code and then decipher it. Now, on one end, we have this naive approach to encryption. On the other hand, we can introduce the perfect solution towards encryption. All right, and that's a one-time pad. One-time pad is your perfect solution for encryption. The key essentially is a random string, at least as long as the plain text. For each bit of the plain text, you just XOR your plain text with the key, and then you send this encoded message. Right? There's no way an attacker can recover this information. It's a perfect crypto system. Right? So encryption is the encrypted ciphertext is the message XORed with the key, and decryption, you get the message by XORing the encrypted message with the actual key. It's perfect in theory, but it has a couple of disadvantages. It requires truly uniform random one-time pad values. The key must not be used more than once. What happens if you use the key multiple times? Yeah?
If you XOR back to what the encryption was, it gives you back the message.
Yeah, you can combine, if you have multiple ciphertexts, you can combine them, and then, or if you have known ciphertext, you can extract the values of the text, either getting the key or the messages. Key length also depends on the message length. So if you want to send 1 terabyte of data, or if you want to encrypt your hard drive, you need a key that's 1 terabyte long, which is a bit impractical. Right? Also, you need to, like if you communicate between two parties, you need to pre-share the key, which may be a bit hard. So this is essentially perfectly secure, but impractical. Now, for all of the crypto systems that we look at, we want to get as close to one-time pads as possible by becoming practical. Right? So you want to give up as little as possible, and in spirit get towards the one-time pad. But make this practical without having to share such a large key. What could be a nice way to implement a cryptographic system that actually follows this idea of a one-time pad? So you can create a one-time pad by just collecting random bits of input, right? So you ask a random number generator to get you, let's say for a message of 10 characters, 10 bytes of randomness, right? So you share the 10 bytes of randomness. This is your one-time pad with the two parties, and then they can use that for their communication, for encrypting and decrypting. Okay, but now you need to send the one-time pad through a secure channel and share this with the other party. And this is, again, dependent on the message length. What else could you do?
As usual, pressure keys.
But then how would you create pre-share keys? Yes, but how would you create the infinite lengths?
You use key scheduler that you have.
Say again?
Key scheduler, so that you just have an input key that has a fixed size and then randomly generates a new one.
How does it randomly generate a new one on both parties? Let me maybe give you a hint. So now we have one party asking a random number generator to give us a key that's long enough, a one-time pad that's long enough for the message. And then we share this, right? It would work the same if you could just copy and paste the random number generator so that the random number generator produces the same set of random keys on both sides. Then we would only have to copy this random number generator.
But in that case, it wouldn't be a random number generator.
But
it will be just a key. So then a random number generator will be a key itself.
yes, so the random number generator becomes the key. So in the end, if you have a pseudo-random number generator that we initialize, we can create this one-time pad on both ends to some extent. So let's look a bit into symmetric crypto, on how this actually works, how we can reduce the key size to something that is more reasonable while we encrypt the whole message. Encryption and encryption are done with the same key. So there's one key. That's why it's called symmetric. It solves the problem of transferring large amounts of confidential data and reduces security to the problem of transferring a symmetric key. So we have this key exchange problem. We've got instead of having to transfer terabytes of data. So we've got the plain text, we encrypt with the secret key. We've got ciphertext, we decrypt, and we have plain text, and both of which are the same key. Okay? Now, based on the discussion we just had before, we can also, in this spirit, create a simple stream cipher, where we use a pseudo-random number generator to expand a short seed. So the seed for the random number generator, for the pseudo-random number generator, becomes the key, right? And we start with this one key and expand it to a longer sequence of bits. So we go from a sequence of k bits between 0 and 1 to a sequence of n bits between 0 and 1s and stretch it. And then potentially use part of the output as new seed as it feeds back, right? So this allows us to encrypt data of arbitrary length, and in stream cipher we just XOR the message and our pseudo-random pad. We no longer have a random pad, but we have a pseudo-random pad. So we go bit by bit and just encrypt the data as we go along. So the idea here is we set up a stream cipher with a key, which would be the initialization seed for the pseudo-random number generator, and then we just cycle through the plain text, right? But the thing is, again, we can use each key. We have to be careful in how we use the keys and how we initialize, what kind of pseudo-random number generator we use. Now, there's a couple of pitfalls, right? First, malleability. If you flip one bit in the ciphertext, you will flip the same bit in the plain text. Now, if you have this very long stream and you know precisely where in your message, for example, the sign bit is, you can simply flip it. Because with such a stream cipher, you know that the location of the data remains the same, right? Each bit remains at the same place, but it's just encoded differently. It's encoded randomly, but if you look at an encrypted message, bit 15, and you know it's the sign bit, if you flip this bit, you will turn this from plus 100 to minus 100, for example. That's why you always need an integrity check as part of your algorithm. There's also cipher reuse. If two clear texts are encrypted with the same cipher, then we come back to the potential of encoding or leaking information. If you know some bits of one message, you can deduce the corresponding bits of the other message by simply concatenating the XOR operations, right? So which again results in a known plaintext attack for another message, right? If you know part of an existing message, you can use this information to decode bits in another message that you don't know what it means. So you have to use a unique seed to create a pseudo-random cipher stream. So for each message you send, you have to create a new seed. As mentioned before, malleability means, or let's look at the definition of malleability, the quality or state of something being malleable, as in it can be changed, it can be shaped, it can be forged or turned into something else. Or capability of being influenced or altered by external forces. So if you are not aware of the word malleability, here you have this definition and a simple image to remember it. So we've covered stream ciphers. They do share some limitations, but in spirit, a stream cipher is a pseudo-random number generator that you just stretch to the message length and keep XORing and using as a one-time pad. Right? So it's very similar in spirit to a one-time pad and allows you to implement a simple cryptographic primitive. Now, block ciphers, instead of working on bits, they work on fixed size blocks of data. And this allows us to scramble the individual bits. Right? So this gets rid of the issue that we faced before, that the same bit will always be in the same location. Whereas now we take one block of data, 8 or 16 bytes or something, and then just shuffle it as part of the algorithm, as part of the block cipher. And this allows us to, like, the bit 15 in the ciphertext has no indication or no control, like doesn't map directly to only bit 15 in the clear text, but maps to all the bits, right? So this gets rid of this limitation. Now, but it requires a padding scheme to fill the last block. Like if it's not exactly, like if our message is not exactly the length of the block size, we need to pad it to make sure it fits. And we need to have a mode of operation to combine multiple blocks, right? We need to have a way to go through multiple blocks. We have two standards for that, data encryption standard, or DES, where the block size is 64-bit, which is rather short and results in collisions, and the key size is 56 bits, which is way too short and can easily be brute force today. So don't use DES or even triple DES. Both are deprecated and are considered insecure. If you see DES somewhere, you know that, hey, this is not good. Don't use, run away. Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES, is the modern form that's standardized. Block size is 128 bits, so 16 bytes. And key size can be 128, 196, or 256 bits. There's hardware support on all modern hardware, Intel, AMD, and ARM, and this is pretty much what's used everywhere. So even if you are using asymmetric crypto, usually you're only using asymmetric crypto to agree on a symmetric key, because there's so much hardware support for symmetric keys, and this is just much, much, much faster. So how does ECB work in AES? It's the simplest mode of AES that we have. We chunk the message into individual blocks. We encrypt each of them with the same key. So we've got plaintext, 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 and we keep working through it. Encrypted using the key. We have the ciphertext. We encrypt the next block using the key. We have the ciphertext. We encrypt the next message with the key. We have the ciphertext. And then we just concat the ciphertext and send it around. Easy, right? What's the weakness?
If you have collision in cipher text, it probably means that it's the same plain text.
If you have a collision in the ciphertext, it means, not just probably, but it means that we have the same plain text. So the same plain text, if you have 16 bytes that are the same, they're encoded always in the same ciphertext, which means that 16 bytes of zeros will always be encrypted into 16 bytes of the same value. 16 bytes of ones will always be like, all the same 16 bytes will be encoded to the same message. Is this bad? Yes? Why is this bad?
You can see patterns in the ciphertext.
You can see patterns in the ciphertext, yes. This is why this is bad, right? Like if you have an image format, right, you don't see the original colors of the penguin because each block is a bit mangled, right? But you still see what the original shape is because the same 16 bytes will always be encoded to the same 16 bytes in the ciphertext. Let me maybe clarify another difference that, because the question came up during the break, let me clarify that. The difference between stream ciphers and block ciphers. For stream ciphers, you're working on a bit by bit basis, which means the order of the bits stays the same. Right? The order of the bits in the encrypted form is the same as the order of the bits in the plain text. Whereas for block ciphers, you're taking all the bits in a block, you're putting them in a box, you give it a good shake, and then you lay it out new. And you give it a very strong chemist shake so that it mixes up, like each bit influences all the other bits. Right? So the operations for block ciphers is pretty much scrambling and highly mingling with all the bits and with all the information. So this is a massive mix of in between. We're not going to go into the details of how AES is actually implemented and how many rounds AES needs to do. For that, you can take a crypto class or look at the AES algorithm itself. But be aware that there's a good shake happening to all the bits and they're being just scrambled around. Cool. So we know that ECB is bad because the same plain text always goes to the same ciphertext, which allows you to decode to some extent. Now we do have an extended information, extended mode of operation, namely cipher block chaining, or so-called CBC. And here the idea is that we use an initialization vector for the first block that kind of introduces a little bit of randomness and random data. So instead of taking plain text, adding and encrypting it into ciphertext, we add this initialization vector here, right? Which is the same length as the block, and then we XOR the plain text message with the initialization vector. We go through the encryption. The encryption mechanism stays the same as before. And then we continue. For the next block, we take the output, right, the encrypted text, and again, use this as a new initialization vector. Okay? Which means that we are kind of chaining the two blocks together. So this is a form of keeping all of the blocks together, and then we just continue always using the output from the encryption as the new initialization vector for the next. Right? So this gives us the power of actually chaining all of these operations together and ensuring that it fits and can no longer be untangled. Decryption works the same, right? We take the ciphertext, we decrypt, but now we XOR it again with the initialization vector, this time after the decryption. We have plain text, and we get the previous ciphertext into the decryption, and we keep going through it. And this allows us to, again, decrypt the whole message and then concatenate it back together. Okay? Now, each block is, again, encoded into an individual block. And even if it's the same kind of plain text, it's encoded into different ciphertexts. And good thing is you no longer see the penguin, right? Because this introduces this randomness. Now, choice of IV is another interesting question, but here we see that you can introduce more randomness into the blocks, so that the same blocks of plain text all end up with different ciphertexts. Now, what happens to decryption if a bit is flipped due to transmission error? Assume you have encrypted your message, right, using CBC, and you send your message around, but one bit is flipped in the ciphertext. What happens to the resulting plain text that you decrypt? Does the error propagate to all the following blocks? Like, I think we agree that we can decrypt up to where the bit flip happened, right? Or up to the previous block of the bit flip, right? Because do we all agree that we can decrypt up to the block of the right before the bit flip? Right? Because there's no connection, there's no chaining there, so everything works out fine. What happens to the block with the bit flip? Does one bit get corrupted, or
all the blocks? So because
all the bits in the block get corrupted? So we get random data back. Okay. Does the error propagate? Who thinks the error propagates? Yes? Okay. No? Okay, so yes, the error propagates because we're using the ciphertext as IV for the next block. How much of the next block is scrambled?
every block which is thrown out.
So the block right after the transmission bit error, like how much of this block is scrambled? You say everything. Who agrees with the student? Who says the whole block is scrambled? Okay. Who says otherwise? Okay, we've got 80% abstention. Now let's look back for the encryption here. What happens? Right? Let's say there's like one bit in the ciphertext that is being scrambled. Oh, I actually have the animation here. Okay, cool. So one bit gets scrambled. We all agree that this messes up the plain text, right? Because it goes through encryption, and this one bit then influences all the other bits out there. Okay, cool. Now what happens to the second block? How much of the second block is destroyed?
Only one byte.
Only one bit. Because like only this one bit that has been corrupted is being propagated due to the XOR operation of the with the IV. What happens to the next block? Does it propagate? No, it doesn't, right? Because it kind of fixes itself. So one bit transmission corruption destroys the whole block and one bit in the next block, and that's it. Interesting pattern, right? Now this can be used for attacks, if you think about it. So some possible pitfalls. Flipping one bit of the IV will flip the same bit in the plain text. Flipping one bit in a ciphertext block flips the same bit in the next plain text block and mangles the current block. So depending on your attack that you're designing, you may want to flip a particular bit, and if you're really lucky, you don't care about the previous 16 bytes. So the lesson here is that you always need to do an integrity check when encrypting the data. For example, it could be that there's a long length field, that's being encrypted with your domain name, and then a status if you're administrator or not. And if that's long enough, you don't care about the domain name or whatnot, and you just flip the bit in the next target. So you have to be careful regarding malleability, and therefore add an integrity check to the encrypted data. Last block must be padded to obtain the correct block size, and if this is not correctly implemented, it results in a lot of different kind of padding oracles, such as in TLS, where Search has a nice paper on it. Cool. Let's move on and talk about data integrity in that case, right? We've now talked about different kind of encryption primitives for block ciphers and stream ciphers. Let's now move a bit ahead and talk about integrity of data. Now, integrity protects against unauthorized modification. Integrity is not confidentiality, right? Integrity just ensures that it cannot be tampered with, or that at least we detect tampering as data is being sent. So if you think about the malleability of stream and block ciphers, it's very easy to flip bits of the clear text, right? If an attacker has access to the stream. So we need a primitive that allows us to detect any modification of the message. And it cannot be forged or circumvented by the attacker. How could we do that?
Some hashes, as you were on previous slides.
Some hashing, yeah. That's a simple solution. We hash all the data and just append the hash somewhere and make sure that we integrity check the data by hashing it again, and then ensuring that it's the same hash. And as mentioned, we use a cryptographic hash function. The goal is we take an arbitrary length input and generate a fixed length output. Cryptographers don't like input and output. They call it pre-image and image. I don't know, fancy names for it. So the message is the pre-image of arbitrary length. It goes through the hash function and calculates an image, which is a fixed length hash of 128, 256, or 512 bits. Now, if you're working with data structures, for example, a hash map, your main metric for a good hash function is that all the inputs that you hash are uniformly distributed across your space, right? If you're looking to implement a hash map, your main goal is a uniform distribution, and the hash function needs to be very fast, right? Just a couple of operations, okay? For cryptographic hash functions, you need to have a couple of additional properties. For example, pre-image resistance. Assuming you have a hash H, it should be difficult to find a message M for which the hash of M is H. This implies that the function is a one-way function. Like hashing should be one way. Like you can go from data to hash, but not from hash to data. It's very useful for password hashing, right? So it should not be possible to go from image, like from the hash, to the actual pre-image. For example, if you're storing passwords, you should only be storing hashes. Never store passwords themselves. If you have a hash of a password, you can easily check if the password matches by taking the password, hashing it, and comparing the two hashes. So you don't need to store the actual password. On the other hand, if somebody steals the hash of the password, doesn't matter that much, right? Under like modulo asterisks conditions apply. Because it's not easy for an attacker to go from the hash to the actual password that you use if your password is unique. So given a password hash, an attacker cannot recover the matching password without investing massive computational resources. So that's pre-image resistance, right? We cannot go back to the exact pre-image. So far, so good. Also, there's a little bit of information theoretic stuff in there that you cannot, out of even 16 bytes, you cannot recover arbitrary amount of data. Otherwise, this would be an amazing compression tool. That was supposed to be a joke, but I suck at delivering it. Right? Information theoretic, you cannot arbitrarily compress down to 16 bytes. It just doesn't work. Otherwise, yeah, you could compress to 1 bit and extract all the information from there. Second, pre-image resistance. Now, again, you've got pre-image, image, password to hash. Second pre-image resistance is that we cannot find a second pre-image, like a second message that has the same hash. Right? So hashes protect the integrity of messages, so an attacker cannot forge a message with the same hash as an existing message. Because if I only store the hash, and I know like I only want to store the hash, I don't want to store the rest of the data, I want to make sure that an attacker cannot replace the data and send a different message that then maps to the same hash. So it should be hard for an attacker to find arbitrary data or a second set of data that matches the same target hash. Same last property, collision resistance. Like it should be difficult to find two arbitrary messages that have the same hash. So this is slightly different, right? So hashes are used in signatures. An attacker could show one pre-image and have it signed by a third party, and then the signature automatically becomes valid for another pre-image. So for example, I ask a certificate authority to create a certificate, TLS certificate for my own domain, but I have a pre-image with the same hash that is valid for epfile.ch. If the certificate authority signs my certificate, the signature also becomes valid for my other fake certificate that I created for epfile.ch, which would allow me to undermine the security of the TLS ecosystem. So this should be hard. What is the complexity of randomly finding a second pre-image in a random function that generates 160-bit outputs? So for example, SHA-1. Or what is the complexity of randomly finding a collision in SHA-1? What do you think?
So what's the size of input, so of pre-image?
160-bit.
Image.
Oh, anything you want.
So we have same size of image and
Sure. Yeah. Any other opinions? Naively, 2 to the power of 160. If you go through it iteratively, 2 to the power of 80 random messages would produce at least one expected collision if you have random messages due to the birthday paradox. In practice, if people looked at it for SHA-1, it's 2 to the power of 63.1, give or take some, to find a pre-image, and people actually computed it. Now, SHA-1 used to be the default for cryptographic hashing, and it's being retired because 2 to the power of almost 64 may not be possible to run on your laptop, but somebody who throws a couple of years of compute at it would be able to create that. And there's enough agencies out there that are interested in breaking this. So there's been an interesting discussion, like 2005, the first discussion happened that SHA-1 is broken in theory, and then in 2017 it was broken in practice through more practice. And since then, SHA-1 has been in the process of being sunsetted. Right? So it's being retired and replaced by other mechanisms. Which kind of goes back initially to what I mentioned, that we need to replace and update our cryptographic primitives. We used to have MD5 with 128 bits. Where now chosen prefix collisions are easy and straightforward to do. So you should no longer use MD5 in any way or form. SHA-1 collisions are difficult, like they require almost like determined adversaries, but still fairly challenging. SHA-2 is not broken yet, but somewhat related to SHA-1, and there's first attacks against SHA-1, both regarding computation and also regarding weaknesses that reduce the power. So SHA-3 is the current best standard where no weaknesses are known. So key takeaway, going back to this initial message that I started with today, hash function should be complex enough to be hard to brute force, but reasonably computable. Which means that even on today's hardware, we need to be able to compute. Or even on an embedded system, we need to be able to compute it. Let's move on, message authentication codes. So message authentication codes allow us to authenticate messages, as the name already says. They're similar to a hash function, but involve a symmetric key. So instead of just hashing it without any key, message authentication codes add a key to it. The same key is used to generate the MAC and to validate it. Now, everybody can hash and produce the same hash, for example. With a message authentication code, if we have agreed on the key before, this gives us some form of authentication, right? If only the two of us know the key, we can authenticate each other, and we can ensure that the message has not been modified in between. So this is typically based on a hash function, such as HMAC SHA-2, or on block ciphers, such as CBC MAC AES. And the idea is that we have a message, and we agree on a key K on both ends, right? We hash the message using the pre-agreed key that we have, and then the receiving party, such as Google, if you're logged in and want to access our Gmail data or photos or whatnot, it can ensure that, hey, this actually the message comes from Alice or and not from Bob. So this allows a way of authentication, ensuring that this actually works out. So if a man in the middle tries to strip the hash, it cannot do that because of the lack of the key. They would have to break the underlying hash function. So we are using a hash function to also guarantee authenticity by agreeing on this pre-shared key, pre-shared notion. So if you go towards authenticated encryption, we're adding authenticity to encryption, where we combine the two things, encryption and authentication. Now the question is, do you do encryption first or do you do authentication first? There's different approaches. The authentication gives us integrity, encryption gives us confidentiality. We can first encrypt and then use a message authentication code. This would be the first image here, where we first encrypt, we take the plain text, pipe it through a hash function, and then we concatenate ciphertext and the hash. So this is used, for example, in IPsec. We can use first MAC, then encrypt. We can take the plain text, hash it, add it, and then encrypt it, which has a slight computational overhead because we need to encrypt this block as well. Or we can take the plain text at the same time, encrypt and hash, and then parallelize it and just append it. Right? So here, in the third option, the MAC is of the plain text. In the first option, the MAC is of the encrypted text. In the second option, the MAC is of the plain text, but both of it is encrypted. Right? So these are all the different combinations that you can do. All of them are used in practice. Right? Intuitively, the current recommendation is to do encryption first and then MAC on the encrypted data. This, on one hand, unfortunately creates a pipeline, but because you need to wait until the encryption is finished, you can't do it in parallel, but it allows you, it reduces the amount of information. So in the end, you're doing a hash of almost random data. In addition to that, if you move towards authenticated encryption, you're adding an additional tag. Right? So modern encryption modes guarantee both confidentiality and integrity by including additional data that can be that is authenticated but not encrypted, for example, for sequence numbers, metadata, or whatnot. And if you look at IPsec and other protocols, they add additional metrics to that. And one of the examples for that is of authenticated encryption is the Galois counter mode, where similar to the block ciphers we had before, we are adding a counter that enumerates the different blocks and simply increments the counters that have been used and feeds the counter in addition into the block cipher to then encrypt this step by step. This can be used with any block cipher, like Galois counter mode, where essentially you just add a counter. There's the first block, there's the second block, there's the third block, and so on, and you keep iterating through the different blocks, and you just add that to the block cipher, the setup that you have to get additional information about the chaining and metadata. Good. So much about block ciphers and authenticated encryption. We're now going to move a bit away from symmetric encryption and discuss public key cryptography, just the basics again. And here the idea is that instead of one key, you have two keys. A public key, which you can share so that everybody can encrypt data to you, and you've got a private key, which you can use to decrypt the information just for you. So this solves the problem of having to agree on a pre-shared symmetric key. You can publicly disclose your public key so that everybody can send you a message. So you're no longer authenticated, but everybody can send you a message, and then with your private key, you can decrypt the message. Encryption with the public key guarantees that only people with the private key, only the entity with the private key can decrypt. Signing with the private key allows anyone with the public key to check the validity. So we go from plain text through encryption. We use the secret key for decryption, and then we go back to the plain text. Now these two are different keys, right? So public key and secret or private key are different keys, and the mask behind it slightly changes. For symmetric cryptography, the encryption and the decryption is the same algorithm because the same key is being used. Here, the algorithm is slightly different. We're not going to go too much into detail of what is being used, but just the implementation is going to be different. Now, the idea of public key crypto started in 1975 by Diffie and Hellman, which kind of introduced the asymmetric crypto in new directions in cryptography. With the following quote here. We stand today on the brink of a revolution in cryptography. The development of cheap digital hardware has freed it from design limitations of mechanical computing and brought the cost of high-grade cryptographic devices down to where they can be used in such commercial applications as remote cash dispensers and computer terminals. In turn, such applications create a need for new types of cryptographic systems which minimize the necessity of secure key distribution channels and supply the equivalent of a written signature. At the same time, theoretical developments in information theory and computer science show promise of providing provably secure crypto system, changing this ancient art into a science. And this was the root and foundation of the whole field of public key cryptography, which then brought us shopping over the internet as one of many things, right? And trust in websites so that we can have end-to-end encryption between your device and the server that provides you with the latest images of cats without anybody in between knowing that or being able to see what cats you look at. So IDEA happened in 1975. There was no internet in 1975, right? So it was 20 years before the internet, around 25, 28 years before shopping over the internet took off, right? So the internet is not that old. It was opened to the public in 1994. And shopping over the internet, it happened late 90s, but it only took off early 2000s. So this is still very, very recent history. And for you, you likely take encryption for granted. Or when you have interacted with the internet, most of the websites started being encrypted. Until starting 2017, 2018, we saw a huge rise in encryption. Before that, this was not super common. Private websites were usually not encrypted. It was extremely difficult to get the TLS keys. And we'll discuss TLS in a bit more detail later on. Original primitives. What's the basics of public key cryptography? There's a public and a private keys, two keys. The public one is distributed, the private is secret. It must be hard to derive a private key from a public key, and it must be easy to derive the public key from the private key. You encrypt with public key, you decrypt with private key, and it should be hard to decrypt without the private key. So these are just the basic primitives. If you would like to use this scheme as a digital signature scheme, you sign with the private key and you verify with the public key, and it should be hard to create signatures without the private key. For key exchange, you establish a shared secret key over an insecure communication channel. For digital signatures, private key allows the signer to generate an unforgeable signature that attests the validity of the message. The goal is that anybody can verify the signature using the private key. I think I've said this before, not just encrypting with the secret key. There's a bunch of standards. We're not going to go too much into detail, but essentially all the different public-private schemes can be used to implement such a digital signature scheme. Why would this be useful? Let me just give you one example. You may want to distribute software. And we learned 2 weeks ago that some of you are using Linux. Your computer knows the public keys of the software developers. If you type apt key list on a Debian or Ubuntu system, it shows all the public keys of the maintainers that you trust. And when you download software updates or software packages, the package manager will verify that the package that you just downloaded actually comes from a well-known party, right? From one of the maintainers that claims to have actually created this. All the updates are therefore signed, and your computer verifies the authenticity according to the signature. Authenticated email is another option. If Alice knows Bob's public key, she can verify Bob's signature. Like if you're signing your messages, you can prove that this was your message. Or you can even go to sign contracts. So in Switzerland, the legal system allows contracts to be signed with a public, with your private key, so they can be verified using a public key. So the law is already set up in a way that makes it future-proof and digital. Now, one thing that we need to focus on, or we need to figure out, is how to agree on a key, especially on if the network is not trustworthy. So we've got Alice and Bob here, and they want to share some secret data without Eve listening to any messages. So one of the key concern or constraints here is that Eve can only listen. So there's an adversary that just listens to messages. And for example, we can make sure that the messages are not tampered with, right? So they want to exchange the secret data of where the treasure is. What they can do is, well, with a pre-shared key, like both Alice and Bob have the same key. They have their secret data. They put it into the treasure chest, send it over, and Bob can decrypt it using the key. Okay? Very simple, right? The difficulty is that we need to agree on the key. Now, how can we make this without having to agree on a key? We have the box. What do we need to do with the box? It's a very clever trick. Yeah?
They can send locks that only they have the keys to them.
Yeah?
And so if Bob wants only Alice to be able to open the box, he can lock it with Alice's lock. And then Alice can just...
Okay, that's a cool idea. So we send, Alice sends her lock to Bob, and Bob sends his lock to Alice, and then they can agree on that. We don't want to pre-share keys, right? That's an idea of pre-sharing information. But the lock idea is good, and having individual locks is also great. So there's no restriction on just doing one round trip. So maybe let's do 2 or 3 round trips, right? So what does Alice do? Alice locks the box with her lock, sends it over conceptually. Bob locks the box with his lock, sends it back. Alice removes her lock, and only Bob's lock remains, and then sends it over to Bob. Right? So conceptually, this is very simple. And it allows you to have, here in this example, 2, but it can also be expanded to multiple parties, where you have different operations between multiple parties. You just attach multiple locks to the same box. And the idea, the concept here is that you can attach n locks and remove locks individually. And if you go bonkers, you can also make sure that after n locks are there, or after 3 out of 5 locks have been removed, the chest opens, right? So you can build some nice mathematical principles on top of that. So the Diffie-Hellman key exchange is the key protocol to agree on to exchange keys, developed 1976 by Diffie and Hellman. With some preliminary work of Ralph Merkle, and the 3 of them are here on the picture. Now, Merkle, you may also know from data structure that he developed, Merkle trees, right? So these names pop up again and again. Now, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange works in principle similar to before. Right, and here we, instead of doing large primes, which are hard to look at, I'm just giving you an example with colors. So we've got Alice, that starts as G and N, and we all agree about G and N. Right, these are the two values. They're all shared, and Eve knows G and N as well. So these are just 2 pre-known values, and we're just going to call this yellow. Now, Alice and Bob both create their random numbers. Alice creates, her random number is A, which is orange-ish or reddish, and Bob creates a number B, which is tealish. Okay? So by mixing G and N and A, yellow and reddish, Alice gets orange-ish and sends it over to Bob, right? So Alice sends over A to Bob. Eve can observe A. Bob mixes the tealish and yellow, which gives him blue, sends blue over, like B, over to Alice. So Alice now knows G, N, A, B, and lowercase a. Bob knows A, B, G, N, and lowercase b. Eve knows A, B, G, and N. Okay? Now Alice can mix A and B, which gets into K. Bob can mix B and A, which also turns into K, and they've got their private key. Because they subtract the same number from it. Now, this mixing operation, right, gives them the power to agree on this pre-shared key. To agree on the same key without having to pre-share any information. And Eve cannot get to the same key. If you want to look at mass, here's the example. Right, you choose A. Alice chooses A. Bob chooses B. Alice computes G over A mod n. Bob G over B mod n. Since A sends B, and then by doing G to the power of B times A, you get K, and both they both end up as the correct number because they share the same secret. An attacker who observes A and B cannot find the key. That's essentially the simple example. Reverse of function G to the power of A mod P is difficult due to the discrete logarithm. So numbers P and G must be chosen well and large enough, that's clear. And the standards usually define P and G, like these initial values. Okay, so far so good. So we can agree on a key by mixing different colors. So this allows us to agree on a secret value, even if somebody's listening. Is this enough? Now, Diffie-Hellman with a man in the middle is a bit challenging, right? We have a powerful man in the middle attacker, Mallory, and Mallory can now modify the messages or terminate the messages. Now, what Mallory can do, and this also introduces in one of the attackers in cryptographic protocols, what Mallory can do is she can do a Diffie-Hellman key exchange with Alice, but you can also do a Diffie-Hellman key exchange with Bob, right? So Mallory in the middle has both one key that she communicates with Alice and then another key that she uses to communicate with Bob, and thereby decrypts the streams by connecting them somewhere in the middle. So men in the middle may break Diffie-Hellman, and Mallory, who's sitting in the middle, can actually get the clear text information by intercepting the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So you must authenticate each other using, for example, public keys and ensure that this actually works, right? So they need to be signed using a form of public keys. So we need public keys that are signed with the private keys of both Alice and Bob. RSA encryption, right? N is the product of two large primes, P times Q, E is coprime, a little bit of mass there. And the idea here is that RSA just gives you public key cryptography by defining the public keys and private keys. The scheme above is trivially insecure, for example, padding or whatnot. There's a bunch of limitations. Don't implement primitive RSA. You will have an example in the exercise session this Saturday. Elliptic curve cryptography is an extension based on elliptic curves over finite fields. That's pretty much become the standard today. The main benefit is that in elliptic curve crypto, the keys are much smaller for equivalent security. So for example, a 256-bit elliptic curve key is comparable to a 3072-bit RSA. There's a bunch of curves defined, so there's a bit more complexity because there's issues there with the curve selection and whatnot and how you calculate these fields. But in general, this has advantages in size and speed. I have 2 more slides until the break, so I would like to keep those, and then we'll do the break then. So ECC can be used for key exchange, as in TLS, for example, elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, used for signatures. So it's the same as a RSA, for example, so it can be used in the same spots. Now there's issues and limitations for ECC as well. If you have there's limitations if you make implementation mistakes, or you reuse nonces, or you reuse the nonce in multiple signatures. The private key can be recovered, such as done for the PlayStation. There's a bunch of protocol extensions that improve on this, for example, by ensuring specific nonce generation. Bitcoin, for example, are a hash of an ECDSA public key, and iMessages and iCloud keychains also rely on ECDSA. So quick crypto comparison. Asymmetric crypto is powerful, but orders of magnitude slower than symmetric crypto. Usually, you only use asymmetric crypto to exchange a symmetric key, because it's a fixed size, and then you just use a symmetric key because it's much faster and gets you the same security. All algorithms are only safe as a long enough key. So symmetric, 128 to 256 bits, asymmetric, 3072 bits for RSA, or 256 for ECC hash functions, at least 256 bits. Crypto is used everywhere in real life. For example, Kerberos uses symmetric crypto. We're going to discuss this a bit. And the Wi-Fi protected access ensures your Wi-Fi keys or secure remote password protocols use crypto as well. Let's continue. I think I must have messed up the description or the explanation of how block ciphers work, because it's like the 5th or 6th question I got about block ciphers. So the idea is, in a block cipher, you take one block of clear text, like one block, 128 bits of information, then you encrypt it, you end up with one block, the same size of encrypted information. Now, there's a magic function in the middle called encryption that does the encryption or decryption. Now, what it does is it takes this block, looks at all the bits, does shuffling, shifting, XORing, adding, folding, whatnot. Like it just mutilates the data heavily, so that each bit of the plain text influences each bit of the ciphertext according to the key that was given. So one bit of plain text will influence all the bits of the ciphertext. And it's just a big shuffling around. If you're interested in how this works, look at the AES implementation. If you're not interested, just trust me that one bit influences all the outgoing bits. In the end, there's a lot of like shuffling, adding, folding, and whatnot going on with the intention of actually making this impossible to reverse, right, by brute force. And it's influenced by the key. I hope this explains it somewhat. I guess I'll take this as a note to give examples on the slides using some of this shuffling. And maybe I need to have animations of like bits flying around. Cool. Keep the questions coming. This is good. I'm limited to the 15-minute breaks because like sometimes I may be a bit harsh sending you off, but keep the questions coming. If you don't have time to answer the questions here, feel free to ask the questions on Ed as well. Like we'll try to answer those. Let's move on. We've got a bit more material to look at. Public key infrastructure is one of them. We now know for Diffie-Hellman, for example, we need some kind of public keys to actually validate the two ends to ensure that we're communicating with the right target. And for that, we need to have some kind of infrastructure to distribute all the public keys. Now, cryptography reduces a security problem where an attacker could get our data, read our data, modify the data in transit to a problem of key management. It's much more tractable and doable. It's still a hard problem, but it's much more approachable. Public keys do not have to be secret, but they must be authentic. So we need to trust this distribution entity somehow. If a man in the middle can replace a public key, all the security guarantees are lost. Similar to the man in the middle that we've seen, the man in the middle Mallory that we have seen in the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, where the man in the middle would just terminate the connection, decrypt it, and then encrypt it using the next end. So for example, Mallory here, again, intercepts the traffic from Eve to Bob and has one session key with with Alice and one session key with Bob, allowing Mallory to decode the messages. Now, to circumvent this, Alice and Bob need to agree that they are talking to each other and need to verify that they are talking to each other. For that, we need to have public key, like the messages signed by, for example, Bob's public private key, so that Alice can use Bob's public key to verify the messages. Which means that we need a trusted third party to distribute the public keys. So instead of figuring out what the public key of Bob is by asking Bob personally, we can ask a trusted third party, hey, what's the public key of Bob? And this is what a certificate authority actually does. The CI, the certification authority, certifies the keys by signing them. And then if we trust a CA, we trust the CA, and the CA signs the key of Bob that we are being presented, we know that this is Bob's legit key. There's some validation happening. He does some validation before signing the keys. So for example, asking an email, copy of a passport, make you jump through hoops and whatnot. And then you get a signed key, which is a certificate, which contains identity of the holder, validity of the certificate, so there's only a very narrow time range, and the public key of the subject and the signature of the CA. An example certificate uses a bit like this. This is the hex hive certificate. We are using Let's Encrypt. Uses RSA and SHA-256. The key size is 248. And you can go through the different details of the root certificate, which is also 248. The root certificate is what it was signed with, which is signed by ISRG, which is in all the browsers and thereby allows us to validate the root of trust. Now, current browsers know a set of root CAs. There's 144. There used to be 144 in Firefox. And if there's a chain of signatures up to a trusted root, the browser will trust the certificate. In the browser that we have here, there could be the ISRG root certificate, which is then goes to R3, goes to Anil, or we could have DigiCert signing to DigiCert 220, which then signs EPFL and ETH Zurich. So there's different kind of like chains and hierarchies of trust that can be implemented. And you can check out these hierarchies by just looking at the certificates. Quick summary for the crypto details before we go into the case studies. Cryptography can be symmetric, which is fast, asymmetric, using public keys, which enables you to not pre-share keys and can provide confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation. Asymmetric keys should only be used to encrypt short data. For example, the hash of a document when you sign it. This is where you can use asymmetric key, cryptography, or a random symmetric key for encryption of a document. So, for example, when you connect to a server over the internet, you start with Diffie-Hellman to the server. You validate that the server, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange is validated by the signed by the private key of the server by using the server's public key by going up your chain of trust. After the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, you agree on a session key, and then you use symmetric crypto for the session. ECC, the curve cryptography, is replacing RSA as an asymmetric algorithm because it's faster and the keys are much shorter. Now, trust requires a trust root, and this can either be the trusted third party, as we're going to see with TLS, or pre-sharing some kind of information between the parties. Now, one of the issues that we're facing is that web browsers trust around 150 certificate authorities from many different countries and many different environments. Any of those could circumvent the security. For example, Let's Encrypt may be trustworthy, but shady shady certificate authority may also sign as a certificate of an attacker that can then be used to circumvent your connection. So if you're trusting all of these 150 certificate authorities, there may be issues happening. Let's look at TLS. TLS is what is being used to encrypt the data between you and the browser. Building blocks are fairly straightforward. TLS provides confidentiality, integrity, and authentication with the goal of providing a secure channel between two communicating peers. Think of it as you build your client-server app using good old the internet protocols that don't have anything related to security in mind. You slap on TLS and you're good to go. Right? TLS is a way to add security, like confidentiality, integrity, and authentication over a channel after the fact. So it essentially provides you a secure communication channel. Right? So think of it as a way to just establish a communication channel between two parties that is they're no longer able to be attacked by an untrusted third party. Building blocks. Server is authenticated with a certificate, proves its identity by signing information received from the client with a private key. Client and server create a symmetric key using asymmetric crypto. For example, Diffie-Hellman. Previously, there was standard Diffie-Hellman and key transfer, but right now you do an elliptic curve. Once key is established, you use an authenticated encryption with associated data scheme and just communicate securely through that. Now, TLS has a bunch of cipher suites. For example, algorithms can be specified as following. So here we're doing TLS using ALS with 128 bits in Galois counter mode and using SHA-256 as a message authentication code. Right? So this is how you specify the cipher in TLS. Key exchange and signatures default to elliptic curve, Diffie-Hellman, and RSA. Now, this is TLS 1.3, which means there was TLS 1.2, 1.1, and 1, and other versions before that. Lessons from previous versions of this protocol, that flexibility in cryptography can actually hurt security. And it was a very interesting lesson. In the 90s, when these protocols were initially developed, the goal was to provide as many options as possible so that you could pick and choose out of hundreds of different options. Now, we learned that it's better to stick to like same defaults and actually ensure that they can be used safely and that are future-proof. And as we progress in time, we add more and then deprecate others. Now, for TLS 1.2, there were a good 50 to 60 different TLS configurations that could be used. In TLS 1.3, it's 5. Right? So a lot of the different cipher suites were actually removed to ensure simplicity and actually make sure that this can be used in a practical setting. Simplicity is key, right? Stick to safe defaults and don't provide too many options, because too many options result in potential bugs, complexity of implementation, and potential weaknesses as we go up. Because in the end, like if you think about it, an attacker can choose any of these suites. So the security is only as high as the weakest algorithm in the set, because an attacker will always go for the weakest set. So if you provide a large amount of possible targets, the configuration options, you expose yourself to a much higher risk. Constrain and contain the risk to make sure that it can actually be secured. And this is the main lesson of TLS 1.3. So TLS 1.3 removes all no longer safe cipher suites, removes compression, just simplifies the whole protocol end to end. The remaining cipher suites all use authenticated encryption. There's Handshake that is much shorter, partially encrypted already. And the key exchange is always forward secure. Also, it introduces session resumption with a pre-shared key. So you can, if you connect to a website, for example, the second time, you can resume the connection much faster because you have a pre-shared key. About 63% of websites offer TLS 1.3 now, and the number is only going to go up. Perfect forward secrecy, I just mentioned this. This is a new feature where the idea is that session keys should not be compromised even if the long-term secrets are. So for example, if somebody manages to decrypt the public and private keys that you have used to validate the session, it should not be possible for the attacker to decrypt your message. Right? So perfect forward secrecy means that while we are negotiating a session key, the session key is never transmitted or cannot be recovered by a third party, even if the third party throws massive amount of computational power at it and is able to break the public-private key combo used during the negotiation. Now, we already know that governments record a lot of traffic, and especially if it's not perfect forward secure, they try to break certain keys even if it takes years, and then are happy to decrypt data after the fact. Now, for example, Diffie-Hellman like protocols enforce perfect forward secrecy, and they're being used more and more. We've seen that it kind of improves and that the servers are being configured more and more with safe cipher suites. So this goes from 2012 to 2018, and we see that elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman has just taken over while RSA dropped massively, and we will be negligible fairly soon. TLS handshake, right? I'm just going to give you a very quick overview. Here the idea is when you connect to a server, the client hello contains the supported crypto parameters that the client selected. The server responds with an already encrypted server hello. It only requires one round trip. The server hello contains the server certificate, which can then be verified by the client as it decodes it using the root certificates that are available. So you verify along the trust chain that you have to make sure that it matches to any of the root certificates that are present. Optionally, you can still authenticate the client. And once you have established a secure channel, exchanged symmetric keys for continuous communication, the client and the server then use authenticated encryption with associated data to exchange all the data securely. So TLS uses public and symmetric crypto. Public crypto in this example is the certificate authority has signed the server certificate and its own root certificate that are added in the browser. Server signs the key exchange to prove it holds the private key, right? This is what allows us to authenticate the server, and then elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman is used to exchange a symmetric key, and then we've got the symmetric key that is perfectly safe, even if all the communication from this initial key exchange is stored by a secret agency. No matter how much resources they throw at it, they will not be able to decrypt it because of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange that was used. The symmetric crypto follows afterwards. We use an AES block cipher in likely CBC or Galois counter mode for the encryption, and then SHA-2 is used for HMAC for key derivations. Now, TLS has a very long history, right? So TLS is the security protocol that we use today to secure any kind of internet connection. There's been a lot of historical weaknesses. There's been downgrade attacks where an attacker can trick a server into using an old insecure version of TLS by saying, hey, I'm a very old client. I'm Internet Explorer 4.0. Please connect to me in a very insecure mode. Now, if an attacker can flip bits in traffic, they can actually force such a downgrade so that they can then later decrypt the traffic on the fly as it is being set up. You can trick the server into using weak keys, trick the servers into downgrading the Diffie-Hellman parameters. So instead of pre-negotiated the values as described by the protocol, you're using much weaker values. There's padding oracles. There's bugs in implementation, such as Heartbleed, Cloudbleed, and others. Now, again, the takeaway is that TLS before 1.3 was way too complex, and the key lesson here is that simplicity is key. There's multiple ways to implement TLS. You can use, like to add transport layer security for your protocol. You can either add a new name and port, like for example HTTPS, LDAP as, IMAP as. You can change the port. So instead of HTTP on port 80, we use port 443 for HTTPS. And then the protocol starts with a TLS handshake, which is the recommended way of doing so, which means that we start with a TLS handshake. Right? When you connect to HTTPS, the first interaction is the TLS handshake, as was just discussed before on the TLS slides. Alternatively, you can use the weak and vulnerable version, where you just do a start TLS command on a standard protocol. Right? So the first part of the protocol goes over in clear text, and then you issue start TLS, and you do the handshake and key exchange after start TLS. Now, a man in the middle may pretend that start TLS is not supported because they can terminate all the traffic in between. And if your client continues and says, oh, what a pity, the server today does, like all the time before my server supported start TLS, today it doesn't, so I will just continue in plain text, then you're out of luck and the communication will be in plain text. So also from a complexity approach of the implementation, it's safer to do the TLS handshake first and not even implement the start TLS protocol. So go for encryption first, like create an encrypted channel, and then start with your protocol. Instead of starting with your protocol, doing some stuff, and then maybe if the client wants, go for an encrypted channel. Like always go for the encrypted channel. Cool. Now we want to deploy TLS on the internet and make sure that it's actually being used. And we see that there's massive increase of TLS. And today's browsers have pretty much focused on going for HTTPS by default. If you enter a URL, your browser will connect over TLS or HTTPS. This is only the case since like 2 or 3 years. Right? This is very, very recent. Before, the default connection would have been to HTTP, and then maybe if it redirects, go back to HTTPS. So HTTP sites are being downranked, which kind of increases the ranking for HTTPS sites and forces website administrators to go for the secure version. And Chrome starts labeling HTTP sites as not secure more and more, and being more and more aggressive about it. Now, another big driver was Let's Encrypt. Who knows Let's Encrypt? Quick show of hands. Oh, a bunch. Who's using Let's Encrypt? What for?
Own HTTPS server.
Own web server? Yeah?
Yeah, to deploy different servers, having a domain, especially having a domain actually.
Web server as well, or mail?
Web server.
Cool. Anything else in web server? Mail server? Oh, I pity you. Who's running their own mail server?
Because brave.
Why do we do this? We should go form a self-help group. Today, in today's world, it's very hard to run a mail server, mainly because a few big players such as Google, Microsoft, are very nasty against people that try to run their own mail servers. It's still an interesting learning experience if you run your own mail server, and you will keep up to date with all the spam filtering. So if you have too much free time, that's one of the things that is recommended. Or talk to me about other ways to spend your weekend. So Let's Encrypt, to go back to the story, is a new provider certificate authority that gives you free certificates. Great, right? And it's trusted by all browsers. And before Let's Encrypt, you had to go through like a very expensive validation. I remember paying, it was like $50 per year 10 years ago or so. Right? So this was fairly expensive. And in the end, like for the companies, this is you have to run 2 to 3 seconds of fully automated compute, and you get $50, which is it's a nice business model, right? A couple of seconds of CPU time for $50, and you scale this a couple of million times over the internet. So, like after some time, you get some actual money together, right? But Let's Encrypt kind of destroyed their business model by just saying, we'll do this for free, and everybody can now create certificates. And we also make this easy. Instead of you having to copy and paste things into forms, send mails and whatnot, we'll just make this automatable and give everybody a small little Python script they can run on their server to auto-create these certificates. You must place some specific data in a file on your web server or in a DNS entry on your domain. So there's no more any excuse for not using TLS. Cool. Attacks on HTTPS and defenses. Now, HTTPS is not perfect. There's a notion of SSL stripping. So a man in the middle makes you believe that the site only supports HTTP, not HTTPS. Again, I said with modern browsers, this is no longer that much of an issue because we're doing HTTPS by default more and more. And you get big warning buttons that says, oh, this is HTTP. Are you really, really sure if you want to continue? So when you type for this attack, when you type a URL, your browser first connects through HTTP. Server sends a redirect to HTTPS in some cases. Man in the middle doesn't show you the redirect. Your browser continues to use HTTP, and the attacker replaces HTTPS with HTTP in the links to kind of grab your connection. You have no alert, as your browser doesn't know that you should be using HTTPS. So HSTS is HTTP strict transport security, which means that your server sends a header that says, hey, by the way, you should only ever connect to this website through HTTPS. Right? And after this connection, you know that, hey, I'll always connect through HTTPS. And tells the max age that the browser will remember to connect directly by HTTPS for 1 year in this example. Include subdomains, and this is true for all the subdomains of this domain. How can you bypass HSTS?
Well, this is unencrypted over HTTP, so if a man in the middle has access to it, he can just remove it.
I need some more. That's not enough. So on the first connection, you go over HTTP, and the attacker could remove it, but I need one more bit of information.
But the server won't communicate over HTTP, obviously, so he communicates with us over HTTP, and the attacker communicates with the server over HTTPS.
I'm missing one important bit of information. To give you full points on an exam question, I'm missing one bit of information. When does the attack work? You're on the right track. The attack only works if we assume arbitrary man in the middle attack. So maybe let me explain what HSTS is, right? The client, the server sends a token that says, please only connect to over HTTPS to me. And the client stores this.
Only if the attacker could interfere before going to HTTPS. So just he need to...
No, if there's an HTTP connection and this flag is set, the client will know that, hey, I will switch to HTTPS.
So, but the attacker has to prevent client from getting that information.
Yes. So the key is the man in the middle must intercept the very first connection to the server. Right? After you have connected for the first time to the legit server without the man in the middle present, the client will remember that that it is only allowed to connect via HTTPS. Right? So the attacker must intercept the very first connection, otherwise we're good. Right. If the attacker intercepts the very first connect, the browser will never see the HSTS header and thereby just connect over HTTP. You can request that your domain is added to the HSTS preload list. So there's a list of websites that will only be connected to by HTTPS. That's preloaded in browsers so that nobody will ever connect via HTTP to the domains in this list. Digitec is on your list, so your browser will never try HTTP when connecting to Digitec, for example. Cool. Another attack are untrustworthy CAs. I already hinted at that. A trusted certificate authority can give the man in the middle a trusted certificate in the name of any server. Because like everybody is trusted equally. All the trusted CAs can hand out certificates for all the domains. Like any CA can create a certificate for any other CA. And most countries want to have their own certificate authority, right? So you see a potential issue there, that you're trusting a whole bunch of countries. Not all countries should be trusted, right? So there's a potential issue there. I'm not going to name any countries that are untrustworthy, but there's a risk there because you're trusting a whole bunch of countries. So reasons for a CA to hand out fake certificates. It could also be that the certificate authority has been hacked. In 2011, COM402, one of the largest certificate authorities, has been hacked. And certificates were generated for Google Com, login Yahoo Com, login Skype Com, and so on. The certificates were later revoked, but the damage was still done. Also, revocation for certificates is a whole other mess. The CA could be your company's CA. So for example, if you're working at a company, they usually install their own root certificate authorities so they can man in the middle all your traffic for the company purposes, of course, to protect you against malware or whatnot, and to see all your traffic. So never serve to any private websites on company hardware. Could also be that the CA is experimenting and not following the guidelines. Or, as I mentioned before, government may have requested certificates in order to spy on its citizens. These countries listed below are known for having done this in the past, and at least publicly shamed for it. How do you protect against untrustworthy CAs? Well, you can do certificate pinning, which is similar to the HSTS list I just mentioned before. You can have a preloaded list of trusted certificates, and Google has been doing this for a while. So they started shipping hashes of certificates in their browsers, and then allowing it to check like that. Certificate transparency, which is a public list of certificates. It could be CAA. You can publish the certificate authority that you are using in your DNS. You can use DANE, so you can actually publish the certificate itself in DNS. So certificate pinning is you just pin the certificate by hard coding it, and if the server shows a certificate which is not signed by this pin, it does not accept to connect. For example, e-banking app may only trust certificate signed by an intermediary CA of the bank. There were additional proposals to make this more broadly available that didn't work out, but in the end it's a nice angle. So certificate pinning, the client knows that the server certificate must be signed by a pinned certificate from a good CA. It does not accept a fake certificate even if it is signed by a trusted certificate authority. That's one end. It doesn't really scale because you cannot pin all the certificates. This would just be too much data. You cannot have the information preloaded of all the websites or the details in there. So another option is certificate transparency, where you have a public signed logs of certificates that are being used. The certificate authority submits all the certificates they generate. So for example, Let's Encrypt publishes all the certificates it has generated. And then the server can verify if the logs contain certificates that they did not request, and thereby figure out that something is going wrong. Somebody else requests a certificate of their domain, and they can at least detect it and react to it. Clients can verify that the certificate received from a server is in the logs, right, by just going through the open log, and thereby ensure that this works out. There's in this demo for the website that we used before, there's two signatures from transparency logs. Both of these, both of Let's Encrypt and Cloudflare would have to coordinate to fake a valid certificate. Otherwise, this would not work out, and thereby we increase security. You can scan and play with the certificate authority. I think it's best understood if you go play with it, search for some on this website, and then check these certificate logs to see like who is signing which certificates and get some notion by just playing with it. I'm not going to go through this here, but I encourage you to play with the website interface a bit and check out some websites that you know. So let me summarize. TLS authenticates the server and possibly the client, protects confidentiality and integrity of data using a combination of symmetric and asymmetric crypto. Public key infrastructure distributes public keys using certificates and signatures. Does not work on the internet because we cannot trust 150 plus CAs. So there's additional measures being developed, such as HSTS and certificate transparency, to protect against man in the middle or fraudulent CAs, neither of which are perfect, right? So if you think about it, there's no good solution for the certificate, the deployment, without requiring some kind of trust into a trusted third party. Certificate pinning helps some, but needs a manual setup and does not really scale. So there's issues with all the different solutions. It's still the best that we have, and large-scale attacks are likely going to be caught, but there's remaining open issues. That's all that I had for today. Thank you for all the questions during, and I'll see you next week.